It was an early morning on a quiet farm tucked away from the rush of the nearby town. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a soft golden light over the wide fields. Dew still clung to the tall grass, sparkling like tiny diamonds. The farmer was already awake, moving through his fields with steady, practiced steps. Every morning began the same way. He checked the crops, watered the plants, and made sure the animals were safe. Life was not easy on the farm. Every day demanded hard work, long hours, and a mind constantly thinking about what needed to be done next. Yet despite the challenges, the farmer loved this life. He felt connected to the earth, to the rhythm of the seasons, and to the quiet peace that only a farm could bring. The farmer was known in his small community as a man who could always be counted on. People respected him not just for his strength and skills, but for his honesty and generosity. He never turned away anyone in need. Even when he barely had enough for himself, he would share his harvest or give a helping hand. It wasn't something he did for recognition or praise. He simply believed it was the right thing to do. In his mind, kindness was its own reward, and that idea guided every action he took. That morning, the farmer moved along the edge of his property, checking the fences and the water troughs. The farm was alive with sounds, the low moo of cows, the cluck of chickens, and the occasional bark of a dog. He paused for a moment, taking a deep breath, enjoying the fresh smell of wet soil mixed with the scent of growing plants. It was a smell that reminded him of home, of years of work and patience, of every seed he had planted by hand. Far away, on a winding rural road that cut through rolling hills, a car was traveling at a steady pace. The driver was a man used to fast cars and busy schedules. For him, this day was supposed to be a brief escape from the constant pressure of his work. He had spent decades building his life, creating businesses, making decisions that shaped millions of lives. But today he wanted nothing more than a quiet drive, away from the noise and expectation of the world he had built. The road was empty, the weather calm, and for a moment, he felt free. Suddenly, a few dark clouds appeared on the horizon. A breeze picked up, rustling the trees and warning of a coming storm. The man in the car slowed down, noticing the wet patches forming on the road from a light drizzle. He adjusted his grip on the steering wheel, trying to maintain control. The rain began to fall harder, and the road became slippery. His mind wandered, briefly to the farm fields he could see from the distance, thinking about how peaceful life must be for someone living there. But the thought was interrupted by a sudden slide. The car skidded off the road, spinning before crashing violently near the edge of a field. The farmer, still moving through his own land, heard the sound immediately. It was a sharp, metallic crash that cut through the calm morning. He froze for a moment, his heart racing, then dropped the tools he was carrying and ran toward the noise. Adrenaline surged through his body as he sprinted across the uneven ground, calling out to see if anyone needed help. He could see the car, now crumpled against a tree, smoke rising from the hood. The man inside was trapped, slumped forward, clearly hurt. Without thinking about the danger or the work he still had waiting for him, the farmer ran to the vehicle. He tried the doors. They were jammed. The windows were shattered, but the rain made it difficult to see inside clearly. He took a deep breath, focusing on what needed to be done. With careful effort, he pulled the driver out through the broken window, supporting his weight and moving him to the side of the road. The man groaned in pain, his face pale, and his hands trembling. But the farmer kept talking softly, calmly, trying to reassure him. He told him that help was coming, that he was safe, and that everything would be okay. Minutes felt like hours as the farmer held the man upright, keeping him conscious and awake. The rain poured down harder now, soaking them both, but the farmer didn't flinch. He checked for injuries, pressing gently on wounds and adjusting the man's position to make him more comfortable. He didn't care about getting wet or dirty. His only concern was keeping the stranger alive. Finally, he pulled out his phone and called the emergency services, giving them precise directions to the remote location. He stayed by the man's side, holding his hand, talking to him, trying to keep him focused on simple things to distract from the pain. The man, struggling to speak, kept thanking the farmer, but the farmer only shook his head. He didn't want anything in return. Money, fame, recognition, none of it mattered. To him, helping someone in need was a duty, something every person should do if they were able. "You're going to be fine," he said with quiet confidence. "Just stay with me. You're going to be okay." And for a moment, the world outside seemed to disappear. There was only the rain, the farm, and the small act of saving a life. When the paramedics finally arrived, the farmer helped them lift the man onto a stretcher. He explained everything clearly, making sure they understood the full extent of the injuries. The man tried again to offer money or some kind of reward, but the farmer refused. "I'm just glad you're safe," he said. "That's all that matters." The paramedic smiled at his humility, impressed by the calm and strength he had shown under pressure. After the ambulance drove away, the farmer returned to his fields, soaked and exhausted. He paused at the edge of the property, looking out over the land that he had worked for decades. The sun was beginning to break through the clouds now, casting warm light over the wet soil. He smiled faintly, thinking that life had a way of reminding him why he kept going every day. Helping someone, even a stranger, had brought a sense of purpose and satisfaction that money or fame could never provide. Later that day, in a distant city filled with high-rise buildings and luxury, the man from the car recovered in a hospital bed. He was still shaken, still in pain, but he couldn't stop thinking about the farmer who had saved his life. He had been in countless meetings, surrounded by people who wanted something from him, people who flattered him or tried to impress him. But no one had ever shown the selfless courage of a stranger like that. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of genuine human connection, pure, uncalculated, and real. Meanwhile, back on the farm, life returned to its normal rhythm. The farmer continued his work, tending to the animals, fixing fences, and preparing the soil for the next planting. He spoke to neighbors and friends, not about the crash or the man he had saved, but about simple things. How the rain had helped, the crops, how the chickens were doing, or how the community could come together to help one another. To him, life was measured in small acts, in moments of kindness, in the quiet work that kept the world going. Days passed, and the farmer hardly thought about the man in the car. In his mind, it was just one morning, one moment in a long life of work. But the man in the hospital could not forget him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the farmer's calm determination, his steady hands, his unwavering belief that helping someone was simply the right thing to do. It was a lesson he could never unlearn, a reminder that true courage and humanity existed in places far removed from wealth, power, or status. And so, the story of that morning remained quiet, almost hidden from the world. A stranger saved a life, expecting nothing in return. And somewhere on a peaceful farm, a man continued his work, unaware that the ripple of his actions had begun to reach far beyond the fields he knew and loved. After the accident, life seemed to return to its normal rhythm for the farmer, though he couldn't help but think about that morning from time to time. It had been intense, terrifying even, but he didn't dwell on it. Life on the farm demanded attention. There were crops to tend, animals to feed, and fences to repair. Days were long, and there was little room for rest. Yet in quiet moments he remembered the way the man had looked when he pulled him from the wreck, the relief in his eyes mixed with pain and fear. That memory stayed with him, not as a burden, but as a quiet reminder of why he did what he did without expecting anything in return. Meanwhile, in the hospital, the man was recovering slowly. Doctors moved carefully, checking injuries and ensuring no hidden damage remained. Every day he woke to find himself alive, though still fragile. He had been through many challenges in life, had faced countless obstacles in business, but none of it compared to the sudden vulnerability of being trapped, injured, and completely dependent on someone else's kindness. He was a man who had always controlled his surroundings, who could command teams, make instant decisions, and move markets with a single thought. Yet here, in this hospital room, he had no control. He was reminded, in the starkest terms, how fragile life could be. But it wasn't the pain that stayed with him. It was the farmer. He kept thinking about the stranger who had risked his own safety, who had done everything possible to help without asking for anything. He tried to offer money, tried to say thank you in the moment, but the farmer had refused. smiling as though it were simply the right thing to do. That humility struck him harder than any injury, harder than any challenge he had faced in his own life. Here was a man who measured worth not in money or status, but in the quiet courage of helping another human being. The businessman wanted to know more about the farmer. He asked the nurses and local authorities, trying to track down the man who had saved his life. It was not easy. The farmer lived in a remote area, far from the cities and networks the businessman usually relied on. Still, he persisted. There was something in the farmer's simplicity and the unwavering calm he had shown that left a deep impression. It wasn't just gratitude, it was a respect that couldn't be earned by fame or wealth. He wanted to meet the man again, to see him, to understand what life had taught him to make him so selfless. Back on the farm, life continued as usual. The farmer woke at dawn every day, worked in the fields, and cared for the animals. His hands were rough, calloused from years of labor, yet they were gentle when needed. He spoke with neighbors, helped those who asked for assistance, and quietly managed the small but meaningful challenges of farm life. He never bragged about what he had done. To him, saving a life was no more heroic than fixing a fence or planting seeds. It was simply a part of living. The days turned into weeks. Slowly, the man from the crash began to regain his strength. He spent hours thinking about how to express his gratitude in a way that matched the farmer's integrity. Money alone would feel empty, almost insulting to someone who had given so freely. He wanted his thanks to have meaning, to honor the courage and humility of the man who had saved him. He realized that he couldn't approach this as a business deal or a public gesture. It needed to be personal, genuine, and sincere. Finally, after careful planning, he traveled quietly to the small town near the farm. He didn't announce his arrival. He didn't arrive with cameras, bodyguards, or fanfare. Instead, he walked quietly into the town, asking locals about the farmer in the kindest way possible. He asked about the man who had helped him, describing the events from that morning without revealing who he really was. People spoke warmly about the farmer, describing him as a hardworking, humble, and generous man. They told stories of how he had helped neighbors during hard times, how he shared his crops and never asked for anything in return. The man listened quietly, feeling more admiration with every story he heard. When he finally arrived at the farmer was in the middle of tending to a patch of vegetables. The man approached slowly, not wanting to startle him. "Excuse me," he said gently. "I wanted to meet the person who helped me a few weeks ago." The farmer looked up, wiping sweat from his brow. He didn't recognize the man immediately. His mind was used to visitors from the town or occasional strangers passing by. "That was nothing," he replied simply. "Anyone would have done the same." His voice carried no pride, only sincerity. The man smiled, noticing the honesty in the farmer's eyes. He introduced himself, carefully avoiding the mention of wealth or status. "I just wanted to thank you," he said. "You saved my life, and I can't stop thinking about your courage. I wanted to meet you again to express my gratitude." The farmer shook his head modestly. "I don't need thanks. I did what anyone should do. You were in danger and I helped. That's all there is to it." They spent time together, talking about simple things, life on the farm, the work that needed to be done, the challenges and joys of living close to nature. The businessman listened intently, fascinated by the farmer's perspective. He had lived in a world of boardrooms, contracts, and high-pressure decisions, but here, among the crops and animals, he found a calmness he had never known. He realized that courage wasn't always found in headlines or business deals. It was found in the quiet decisions to help someone without thinking about reward. Days passed, and the two men grew to understand each other. The farmer shared stories of his childhood, of how he had learned the value of hard work and honesty from his parents. He spoke of the long hours he spent tending the land, of the small joys that made the labor worthwhile, the first shoots of spring, the laughter of animals, the warmth of the sun after a long rain. The businessman shared fewer details of his life, keeping his fortune and influence hidden. Instead, he listened, learning lessons that money and power had never taught him. As the relationship developed, the businessman began to see opportunities to help in ways that mattered. He didn't want to overwhelm the farmer or take away his independence. Instead, he looked for ways to support the farm, to improve the lives of the farmer's family, and to contribute quietly to the community. He observed how the farmer made decisions, how he treated others, and how he balanced work and kindness. Everything he had seen in that one morning, the calmness, the selflessness, the bravery, had left a permanent mark on him. For the farmer, life remained grounded in the simple, daily routines he knew well. Yet there was an unspoken connection now, a sense that his actions had mattered in a larger way than he had imagined. He didn't fully understand the man's intentions or the impact he had had, but he felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing he had done the right thing. Every day he continued to work to help neighbors to maintain the rhythm of the farm. The rain came and went, the seasons changed, and life went on, but the memory of that morning and the stranger he had helped lingered gently in his mind. Meanwhile, the businessman began planning small gestures of gratitude. He sent a few items to help with the farm, better tools, seeds for the next planting, and supplies that made the work easier. He did it quietly, leaving notes that spoke of respect and admiration, not charity. He wanted the farmer to feel appreciated but not patronized. He wanted the gesture to honor the courage and kindness that had been shown that day, the bravery that required no applause, no recognition, only action. Even as the man began to recover fully, he kept returning in thought to the farmer. He knew he had witnessed something rare, something that couldn't be bought or sold, a quality that existed in people who acted from the heart. The farmer's humility had changed the way he saw the world. It had reminded him that wealth and power were meaningless if they could not be balanced with compassion and courage. And he resolved quietly that he would find a way to honor the farmer's actions without taking away the dignity that made them so remarkable. The farmer, on the other hand, never asked questions, never sought attention. He simply continued with his work, rising before the sun, caring for his animals, tending to the crops, and quietly helping anyone who needed it. He didn't realize how much he had inspired the man from the car, how deeply his simple act of kindness had left an impression. In his world, actions mattered more than words, and integrity was measured by what one did when no one was watching. That morning, he had acted without hesitation, without expectation, and in doing so, had changed the life of someone who thought he had seen it all. And so, life continued, intertwined in unexpected ways. The farmer remained humble, grounded, and diligent, while the businessman, quietly transformed, began to reflect on the power of simple human connection. In the coming days and weeks, their paths would continue to cross, leading to moments of gratitude, understanding, and eventual transformation. But for now, both men were left with the quiet knowledge that courage, kindness, and humility could exist anywhere, even in the most ordinary of places, even in the actions of the most ordinary of people. Days turned into weeks, and the farmer continued his life as usual, rising early with the sun, tending the crops, and caring for the animals. The rhythms of farm life were steady and familiar, and there was a quiet comfort in knowing what each day would bring. Yet somewhere in the back of his mind, he thought occasionally about the man from the car. He had done what he thought any person should do, and the memory was more of a fleeting thought than a burden. To him, life was measured in small acts of honesty and care, not in fame or recognition. The businessman, meanwhile, could not forget the farmer. Each day he replayed the events of that morning in his mind, thinking about how calmly the farmer had acted, how he had faced the danger without fear, and how he had refused any reward. The man had lived in a world of ambition, deals, and power, but nothing in his career had shown him courage like this. It wasn't the danger of the car crash that stayed with him. It was the selflessness, the humility, and the genuine concern of a man who had nothing to gain and everything to risk by helping a stranger. He decided it was time to do more than just quietly admire the farmer. He wanted to show gratitude in a way that would honor the man's character. Money alone felt shallow. Lavish gifts seemed unnecessary and almost disrespectful. The farmer's life was simple, and imposing extravagance would not feel right. He needed a way to show thanks that respected the farmer's dignity, that recognized his courage, and that also offered something meaningful for his future and his family. After careful thought, the businessman made his way back to the farm, this time with a plan. He arrived quietly, avoiding attention, and asked to speak with the man who had saved him. The farmer was working in the fields, bending over to check the soil when he noticed the stranger approaching. The businessman greeted him politely, introducing himself again, but still without revealing the full extent of his identity. "I wanted to see you again," he said, I wanted to thank you properly for what you did." The farmer looked up, smiling faintly. "There's no need for thanks," he said. "I did what anyone would do. That's all." He dusted the soil from his hands and returned to his work as though it were a normal day. His words, simple and calm, made the businessman pause. Here was a man who truly did not expect anything in return. His humility was quiet but powerful, and it made the businessman think deeply about what kind of gratitude would be meaningful. They sat together on a wooden bench near the edge of the fields, watching the sun begin to dip lower in the sky. The air smelled of fresh earth and growing plants, and the sound of animals moving about added a peaceful rhythm to the conversation. The businessman asked about the farm, about the daily challenges, and about the dreams the farmer still held for his land. The farmer spoke openly without exaggeration or complaint. He explained the difficulties of making ends meet, the long hours of work, and the simple joys that made it all worthwhile. Every story he told carried a lesson about patience, resilience, and the value of honesty. As the conversation continued, the businessman realized that helping this man meant more than just acknowledging the past. It meant creating an opportunity for the future. He wanted to do something that could make a real difference, something that would help the farmer continue his work and support his family, while still respecting his independence. He began to explain his ideas carefully, emphasizing that nothing would be done without the farmer's agreement. "I don't want to take anything away from your life," he said. "I only want to help you, your family, and your community in ways that make sense to you." The farmer listened, his expression thoughtful but cautious. He had lived a life of hard work, relying on himself and a few trusted neighbors. He wasn't used to offers like this, and he worried that accepting help might change the balance of his life. Yet there was something sincere in the businessman's approach, an honesty that matched the integrity he valued so highly. Over the next few days, they walked through the fields together, discussing possibilities. The businessman offered tools, equipment, and resources that could make the farm more productive. He also suggested opportunities for the farmer's children, like education and training, that could open doors the farmer had never imagined. The farmer remained humble throughout. He accepted some assistance but refused anything he felt would disrupt his way of life. He wanted the farm to stay his own, to continue the traditions he had learned from his parents. Yet, at the same time, he recognized the rare opportunity before him and began to consider how these new resources could improve life, not just for him, but for the whole community. Slowly, trust built between the two men, rooted in mutual respect and understanding. At the same time, the farmer's neighbors began to notice small changes on the farm. There were new tools, improved irrigation, and small structures that made work easier. Yet the farmer never boasted about these improvements. He continued his routine with quiet diligence, sharing what he could with neighbors and lending a hand when needed. For him, the work itself was its own reward, and the act of helping others remained central to his life. The businessman continued to visit occasionally, always respectful of the farmer's independence. He learned about the community, the local schools, and the people who relied on the farm in small but important ways. With every visit, he saw more of the farmer's character, how he treated animals with care, how he mentored younger neighbors, and how he handled challenges with patience and grace. It became clear that the man's true wealth was not in money, but in integrity, kindness, and the respect he had earned from everyone around him. As time went on, the relationship between the two men deepened. They shared meals, stories, and moments of quiet reflection. The businessman would often ask questions about farming techniques, about life in a rural area, and about the challenges that came with the seasons. The farmer answered patiently, sharing his knowledge without condescension, and the businessman listened as if learning lessons he had never been taught in boardrooms or offices. There was a subtle transformation in both men. One was humbled by generosity without expectation, and the other inspired to act with thoughtfulness and care. One afternoon, as they sat under a large oak tree on the edge of the farm, the businessman finally revealed part of his plan. He wanted to ensure that the farm could thrive for generations, that the farmer's children would have opportunities he himself had never had, and that the community could benefit from small but sustainable improvements. "I don't want to take away your life," he said. "I only want to give you options you didn't have before. You can choose what is right for you and your family." The farmer paused, considering the words carefully. He had always lived a life of hard work and patience, believing in the value of self-reliance. But he also saw the sincerity in the businessman's eyes. He realized that accepting help did not mean losing his dignity. It meant creating a future where his labor could be supported, not overshadowed. Slowly, he nodded. "If it helps the farm and the people around us, then I will consider it," he said. "But I will do it in my own way." Over the following weeks, small changes began to take place. The farm received new equipment, seeds, and resources to improve productivity. The businessman helped arrange for training opportunities for the farmers' children, ensuring they could pursue their interests while respecting the family's traditions. Local neighbors were offered support too, in subtle ways that improved the community without creating dependence. Every step was measured, thoughtful, and respectful, just as the farmer had inspired the businessman to act. Through it all, the farmer remained humble, never boasting or seeking recognition. He continued his routines, rising before dawn, tending to the crops and caring for his animals. The farm grew stronger, the community felt the benefits, and the connection between the two men deepened. It was a bond built not on money or status, but on mutual respect, shared values, and the recognition of what true courage and kindness meant. Even the businessman was transformed. He had seen firsthand that true wealth was not measured in dollars or influence, but in the integrity, generosity, and humility of a person. The farmer's simple act of helping a stranger had changed the course of his life, teaching him lessons that no success or achievement could ever convey. And as he continued to work with the farmer to improve the land and support the family, he realized that sometimes the greatest power lay not in what one could take, but in what one could give. In this way, life on the farm became a quiet story of transformation. The farmer continued his work with patience and care, and the businessman learned to appreciate the quiet, steadfast courage of ordinary people. The crash that had once brought chaos had now sown the seeds of a lasting friendship, built on trust, humility, and the recognition that true value lies not in wealth but in character. The story of that morning, of a man saved by a stranger, began to ripple quietly through the lives of both men. For the farmer, it remained a memory of duty fulfilled and life lived honestly. For the businessman, it became a reminder of what mattered most in the world: courage, kindness, and the simple human connections that could change lives in ways far greater than money or fame ever could. And so, their journey continued. Together they nurtured the land, supported the family, and strengthened the community, never forgetting the moment that had brought them together. The farmer, still humble and diligent, continued to rise with the sun and care for his crops and animals, while the businessman quietly learned lessons that would stay with him forever. It was a story of selflessness, gratitude, and transformation, a story that proved that even the smallest acts of kindness could create ripples that lasted a lifetime. Weeks had passed since the businessman had first quietly returned to the farm. During that time, life had slowly begun to change, not in sudden or dramatic ways, but in small, meaningful shifts that made a difference in the farmer's life and the lives of those around him. The farmer continued to wake before the sun, moving among his crops and animals with the same quiet determination as always. Yet there was a new rhythm now, one that included subtle improvements to the farm, tools that made work easier, and ideas shared by someone who had seen the value of his hard labor and wanted to honor it. The businessman had spent time understanding the farm, the land, and the family. He noticed how the farmer carefully balanced the needs of the animals with the needs of the crops, how he managed time efficiently, and how he always thought not just of himself, but of the people around him. Even the smallest actions, like leaving extra vegetables for neighbors or helping repair a neighbor's fence, spoke of a generosity that was rare in the world he had come from. He admired the farmer not just for saving his life, but for the life he led every day, a life full of dignity, responsibility, and care. One afternoon, the businessman visited the farm with a plan. He wanted to do something more concrete, something that could create lasting benefits. He approached the farmer, who was busy fixing a fence near the edge of the property. "I've been thinking about how to help," he said. "I want to support the farm in a way that keeps it yours, that allows you to keep working the way you always have, but also opens doors for your family and the community." The farmer paused, looking up from his work. His hands were rough and calloused, but his eyes were calm, curious, yet cautious. "I appreciate your thoughts," he said, "but I want to do things my way. I don't want my life changed too quickly or in ways I can't control. The businessman nodded. He had anticipated this. I don't want to force anything on you, he said. I only want to offer options. You decide what works best and I'll follow your lead. This was an important principle for him. He had seen too many times in his life how well-intentioned help could go wrong if it was not offered respectfully. He wanted to honor the farmer's independence, his pride, and his dignity. That respect became the foundation of their growing trust. Over the next several weeks, small projects began quietly on the farm. The businessman provided better farming equipment, new tools for plowing, harvesting, and irrigation that allowed the farmer to save hours of labor each day. Seeds were delivered for the next planting season, including varieties that could produce more food and sustain the farm through difficult weather. Simple, practical upgrades were made to the water system, ensuring the crops and animals had enough even during dry spells. Each improvement was subtle, blending into the life of the farm rather than overpowering it. The farmer observed all of this carefully. He accepted the help cautiously, choosing only what made sense and keeping control of every decision. He was grateful, of course, but not overwhelmed. He wanted to ensure that the farm remained a place where his work mattered, where every harvest reflected his effort, skill, and patience. The businessman understood this completely. He realized that the farmer's true wealth was not in money or resources. It was in knowledge, resilience, and integrity. Any support given had to respect that. At the same time, the businessman thought about the farmer's children. He had seen the boy and girl play in the fields full of curiosity and energy, yet limited by the resources available to them. He quietly arranged opportunities for education, ensuring they could learn new skills, explore their interests, and dream bigger without abandoning the life and values their parents had instilled. He met with the local teachers and explained the situation delicately so that the family would feel supported, not pressured. The farmer noticed these gestures but did not demand recognition. He remained focused on the farm, on the soil, the animals, and the seasons. But he began to see how these small acts could create real opportunities for the future. He started to consider ways to improve the land further, to organize the farm's resources more efficiently, and to plan for the long-term well-being of his family. Each day became a balance between tradition and improvement, between his own judgment and the subtle support he had been offered. Neighbors soon began to notice the changes as well. The farm became slightly more productive, with healthier crops and more abundant harvests. Water systems ran more efficiently, and the animals were better cared for. The farmer never spoke of the businessman's involvement. To the community, the improvements seemed like the natural result of hard work and experience. And yet quietly, those who had known the farmer for years realized that the improvements were also a result of someone recognizing his value and wanting to give back in a meaningful way. The businessman continued to visit, often taking long walks with the farmer across the fields, observing the crops, talking about farming techniques, and sharing ideas without imposing them. Sometimes they spoke about life in general, about responsibility, resilience, and the small choices that defined character. The businessman learned lessons about patience and humility, seeing firsthand how a life lived with honesty and care could create results more lasting than wealth or fame. The farmer, in turn, gained a deeper understanding of the resources now available to him and how they could be used to secure a better future. One evening, as the sun began to set behind the distant hills, the businessman invited the farmer to sit on a bench near the farmhouse. The air smelled of fresh earth and growing plants, and the sound of animals settling in for the night created a quiet peace. "I want to do more," the businessman said softly. "I want to support your farm, your family, and your community in ways that last for generations. But I want it to be done the right way, with your guidance." The farmer nodded thoughtfully. He had always worked hard, built everything with his own hands, and valued independence above all else. Yet he also recognized the rare opportunity before him, a chance to protect the farm, strengthen his family, and leave a legacy without compromising his values. The conversation turned to practical matters. The businessman suggested setting up storage for the crops to reduce waste, creating a small training program for local children who might want to learn about farming, and investing in tools that could be shared among neighbors. Each idea was carefully considered by the farmer. He asked questions, weighed the options, and only accepted what aligned with his principles and needs. The businessman followed his lead completely, ensuring that nothing felt forced or overwhelming. Over time, the farm began to thrive in ways it had never done before. Harvests were more plentiful, the animals healthier, and the farm became a small hub of knowledge and support for the surrounding community. The farmer remained humble, working from sunrise to sunset, sharing what he could, and teaching younger neighbors the skills he had learned over a lifetime. Yet beneath the calm routine, there was a quiet transformation. The farm had grown stronger, the family more secure, and the community better supported, all thanks to one selfless act of kindness that had started with a stranger in need. The businessman watched all of this with quiet satisfaction. He realized that the farmer's life was now not only safer and more productive, but also richer in ways that money alone could never provide. He had learned that real impact came from understanding, respect, and subtle support rather than grand gestures, and he knew that the farmer, despite everything, had remained the same humble, hard-working man who had acted with courage without expecting anything in return. One day, the businessman brought a gift to the farm, a simple gesture, not flashy but meaningful. It was a set of tools, carefully chosen to make work easier and more efficient, along with supplies that could help the farmer's children pursue education. "This is for you and your family," he said. "Use it in the way that works best for you. I trust your judgment." The farmer accepted with gratitude but no fanfare. He smiled gently, placing the tools carefully, understanding the thought and respect behind them. Life on the farm continued, full of work and quiet satisfaction. The farmer rose each morning with the sun, cared for his crops and animals, and helped neighbors whenever needed. The businessman continued to visit, quietly observing and offering guidance when asked, always respecting the farmer's independence. Over time, the subtle changes became lasting improvements. The farm was more productive, the family more secure, and the community stronger. Yet through it all, the core values remained unchanged: honesty, humility, and the willingness to help others. And somewhere beneath the surface, the businessman reflected on how one act of selfless courage had created a ripple far beyond what either man could have imagined. A simple moment on a rainy morning, a decision to help a stranger, had led to transformation not just for one family, but for an entire community. It was a lesson that would stay with him forever, a reminder that true greatness often comes not from wealth or power, but from acts of kindness that honor human dignity and courage. The story of that morning, the crash, and the farmer's selfless bravery had quietly unfolded into a journey of gratitude, growth, and transformation. It proved that small, respectful gestures of support could create ripples that changed lives without demanding attention, and that humility, hard work, and courage could inspire actions far greater than any fortune or fame could ever buy. And so, the farm thrived, the family remained secure, and the community grew stronger. The farmer, still humble and hardworking, continued to rise with the sun, tending to the land and animals with care. And the businessman, quietly transformed, learned that the greatest lessons often came from the simplest acts of humanity: the courage to help, the humility to give, and the wisdom to support without taking away dignity. The farm was bathed in golden sunlight one early morning as the farmer moved through his fields, checking the crops and feeding the animals as he always did. Life had returned to its quiet rhythm. Yet there was an unspoken sense that something extraordinary was about to unfold. The farmer had grown used to the subtle improvements and support offered by the businessman, but he still thought of each gesture as help from a kind neighbor, rather than recognition of his selfless courage. He focused on the work, the soil, and the animals, believing that life's true rewards came from diligence and care, not praise or material gain. The businessman had been visiting regularly, quietly observing the farm, offering advice when asked, and making sure the resources provided were used wisely. Over the weeks, he had grown to admire the farmer even more deeply. His humility, bravery, and commitment to doing the right thing had left a lasting impression. Yet, there was still one thing the businessman had kept: